Now, Norway says that it will elevate UN Security Council discussions of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to a ministerial level. The council will hold its first meeting of the new year on January the 19th. Norway says that this is in an effort to highlight the need for council to restore its focus on this decades-long conflict. Juul played an instrumental role in the 1993 Oslo Accords peace initiative involving the then Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat. That was the pledge by Mona Juul, who's Oslo's permanent representative to the UN. Juul has lamented the reduced international attention to the issue, which has been sidelined as a result of multiple other conflicts raging across the Middle East. She says the people of Israel and Palestine do not deserve to find themselves in this situation. Juul was outlining Norway's priorities as it assumes the presidency of the Security Council for January. She's arguing that 30 years after the Madrid conference, the Israeli-Palestinian issues deserve more attention. The Norwegian diplomat says that it's critical to enhance the Council's focus and need to find a political solution to this protracted conflict and avoid further actions that undermine the prospect of the two-state solution. Juul reiterated her country's opposition to any unilateral action in the conflict, specifically referencing Israel's settlement expansion in the occupied territories. Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined by Hasan Ayoub, who is an assistant professor in political science at the An-Najah National University in Palestine. He joins us now via Zoom from Nablus. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
1993 is such a long time ago. The world was different. The Palestine-Israeli conflict also quite different at that time, even if the issues remain the same.
Well, it's very hard for me to say our issues remain the same. As a matter of fact, issues only have got more complicated, and the conflict is witnessing some kind of evolution into stages that any talk today about a two-state solution is nothing but a black comedy. Israel turned the whole process in those long 3 decades of a charade, not a peace process actually. What we had only is a process without any results, without any significant steps or significant changes when it comes to Palestinian national rights. So it's very hard to say that, things are the same. Actually, things are getting more and more hard for Palestinians, and our national goals seem one day after another are very much remote than they were in 1993.
Was there real hope after the Oslo Accords in 1993? I'm reminded, if I look over time, there have been meetings at Camp David with US presidents. There have been discussions over time, things signed, agreements made, but we always seem to end up in the same situation where the conflict escalates, people are killed, and it's almost as if we're stepping backwards more than we are going forwards.
Yeah, I can't agree anymore. We are going back. We are not making any progress. And why is that happening? Because every approach to this conflict so far, whether it was by the United States, the European Union, or the United Nations, did not touch the main issues of the conflict. Those main issues of the conflict revolve around the fact that the Palestinians are facing a settler colonial state. And when we talk about settler colonialism, we are talking about the displacement of the Palestinians since 1948. We are talking about the status of Jerusalem. We are talking about the rights of the refugees, Palestinian refugees. All those topics, all those core issues of the conflict had been so far sidelined in favor of negotiating and renegotiating the terms and conditions through which Palestinians may or may not be upgraded, sort of, in what is called the self-government that we have, and we call it the Palestinian Authority. As a matter of fact, and since I'm talking on a channel in South Africa, the situation in Palestine, in the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967, has turned more or less like the Bantustan system, that you experienced in your history. The only difference is that the national leadership of the African national movement at the time did not accept the Bantustan to be a replacement of black South Africans' right of self-determination, of equality, of living in a democracy without racism, without apartheid. And recently, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and other human rights organizations describe the situation in Palestine as a whole and in the occupied territories since 1967 as being a system of apartheid and even a system of Jewish supremacy. This is what the international community does not talk about. Taking the good intentions by the new president of the U.S. Of the UN Security Council, the Norway, insisting on the discourse of a two-state solution in itself is very deceiving, and it has no grounds whatsoever to talk about it anymore, because Israel has created a situation in the occupied territories where any talk about a Palestinian state is nothing but a joke. The situation here looks like a Swiss cheese, where Palestinians live in small halls, enclaves, attached to each other by a whole system of tunnels, of bypass roads, being sliced and diced by Israeli settlements and by Israeli checkpoints. So this is the situation, and this is why in the last few weeks, those calls, particularly by the Special Coordinator for the Peace Process, the UN Special Coordinator, Mr. Tor Wensland, when he reported to the Security Council, he drew a very grim picture of the situation on the ground in the occupied territories. And I agree with his depictions, and it is very well known that the situation here is so precarious, is inflammable when it comes to settlers and settlements. But the conclusion that he arrives at, and this is the ground for the discussion in the Security Council, is presenting the UN as a mediator. As a matter of fact, the way I understand the role of the United Nations is not a mediator. The United Nations should be an arbiter and should respect its own resolutions when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And I was just about to ask, actually, it sounds as if Ms. Juul perhaps is overly optimistic, given her history with the Oslo Accords and wanting to put this on the agenda. But for as long as the United States has a veto on the UN Security Council, I guess they can discuss as much as they want, but nothing really will move.
Yeah, look, just to go back a few months earlier, last May, when the Palestinians in the entirety of Palestine, I'm talking here about the occupied territories, I'm talking here about Palestinians who live inside Israel proper, including East Jerusalem, Palestinians took to the streets to protest in what I can call a semi or a mini intifada, a mini uprising against Israel. The United States at the time prevented the possibility of holding such a meeting of the Security Council on the level of ministers at least 3 times to protect Israel and to shield Israel from international communities' actions. There is nothing that would prevent the United States today under the new administration to take the same steps. In this sense, there is no much difference between the previous administration under Donald Trump and the administration of Joe Biden. Actually, this administration and the language that is being used in the United Nations by Tor Wennesland or by the Norwegian presidency of the Security Council revolves today around what you can call economic and security dimensions of the relationship, quote unquote, between Palestinians and Israelis. The conclusion that Tor Wennesland himself reached in his debrief to the Security Council is that he called upon all parties to support the Palestinian Authority, to enable it to deliver to the Palestinians, and to halt any steps that would undermine the Palestinian Authority. There is nothing whatsoever about the political dimension, about Palestinians' political and national rights. There is nothing about the resumption of the political process with all its, pitfalls and its shortcomings. So the whole discourse today that being adopted by the American administration reflects the priorities that Israeli governments have put recently, particularly the current government, that we are not going to negotiate, we are not going to talk on politics. The only thing that we can offer to the Palestinians today, to the Palestinian leadership, is how to deepen, how to level the increase the level of security coordination, and how to take few steps to enhance Palestinians' economic and life conditions in the occupied territories. So the whole thing now is being discussed under this umbrella.
So Ms. Juul did say that, look, unilateral actions such as the expansion of occupied territories can't be allowed to happen. But she did also say that it's important that there is a Palestinian Authority that can speak with one voice for all Palestinians. Is there that one voice, or is that part of the issue on the Palestinian side?
Okay, here we have 2 things. The first one is about what is being described as unilateral actions. Actually, the only party who can take unilateral steps is Israel, because Israel is the power holder here. And the question would be for the Security Council, why this council was not able until now to implement the last resolution that was made in 2016, which is a resolution 2334, that calls upon Israel to stop all sorts of settlement expansion and settlement building in the occupied territories. The inability of the Security Council to compel Israel and to make Israel abide by this resolution is, the least to say, is very shameful. So this is what I understand as unilateral steps. Palestinians cannot take any unilateral steps. Number 2, when we talk about the region and the priority of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, a few years ago, the region was not so inflammable like today. We did not have all those kinds of complications, but still the Security Council and the United Nations did not take any serious steps to prevent Israel from settlement expansion. So it's not about taking unilateral actions. It's about the ability of the international community. Yeah. It's about the ability of the European
Professor,
Union.
We're running out of time. Running out of time, and I really do need to get to the question I asked about one voice of Palestine. Is there one voice?
No, unfortunately not. On this, one should be very, very clear that Palestinians today are divided since 2007. Because we have a Hamas movement took over in the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian Authority and Fatah in the West Bank, which makes it very difficult for the Palestinians to present themselves and to have one representation that would give them the credibility and the strength that they need to address international community. But this very important point, again and again, this cleavage between the Palestinians themselves was the creation not only of internal conflict and internal rivalries between Fatah and Hamas. It was created by external intervention and international community's refusal to legitimize and to admit and to recognize the elections that Palestine held in 2006. The entire problem started from there. So we can't just say, okay, let's look what is happening today. The international community has its own responsibilities because Israel, the United States, and I remind those who hear and see us that at the time, the special coordinator of the United Nations, when he delivered his report, in that report, I remember very well that he indicated that the United States, Israel, and other parties, including from the Palestinian authorities, were very deeply involved in provoking the cleavage and the fight in Gaza between Fatah and Hamas at the time. So yes, we are divided today, but we have to to set the record straight, because we were not divided before this kind of intervention.
Professor, we're going to have to leave it there, and I hope that our conversations will be about improvements going forward. But I suspect that there's a lot of talking and a lot of negotiating on the horizon. Yes. But thank you so much for this initial conversation of 2022. Thanks for your time.
That's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good night to you. Okay, so that was Professor Ayoub talking to us about Israel-Palestinian conflict and the situation that the Norway is taking up the chairmanship of the Security Council, and they want that back on the agenda.